Welcome back to Snippet Coder, and we are back in our video, and this is the first part of our WebRTC meeting application with Node.js and Flutter. So in this video we are going to write our Node.js API. So before starting the video, if you are new to our channel, subscribe the channel by clicking the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get notified about our latest videos. Thank you. So first of all, we have to add two packages in our Node.js API, and the first one is the Mongoose, and this package we are going to use for storing our meeting detail and meeting users. And the second package which we are going to use is the socket.io, and this will be used as a signaling server in our Node.js application, the Flutter application, for the communication of the WebRTC signal and all. So now let's move to the code part. So here in the package.json file, we have to add the packages, and for adding the package, we will open our terminal. So here we have to run the command npm install mongoose, and it will add the package for the mongoose. Then same we have to do for our socket.io also, and here we will put npm install socket.io. So here it will add the package. So now here we will add that folder structure and all, and the first folder we will create here config, and we will add the new file here, and name of the file is app.config.js file, and here we have to add our MongoDB connection and all, and here we will create one variable constant mongo_db_config is equal to, and here we will put curly brackets, and here we will put a db, and here we have to put the path here MongoDB ://localhost/meeting-app, and here we will put module.exports is equal to curly brackets, and here we will put this MongoDB config. So now we have to create the model files, and for that also we have to create one folder here, models, and the first model file we are going to create here is meeting.model.js file, and here we have to create constant mongoose is equal to required mongoose. It will create the object here. Then we will have constant schema is equal to mongoose. Then here we have to create constant meeting is equal to mongoose.model, and here we will create the schema here, and we will put the name as a meeting. This will be our table name or schema name, you can say. Then we have mongoose.schema, and here we have to create variables. First one is a host ID, and this will be the ID of the user which is going to host that meeting, and here we will put type will be string. Then we have required true, and this variable is required. Then we have host name, and we will put here type string required true. Then we have the start time, and the type will be date. Then we have the required true. Then here we have to create one more object, that is meeting users, and here we will put meeting users, and type will be in the array format. Here we will put curly brackets, then the type will be mongoose.schema.types.object ID, and the reference we will pick from our meeting user, and that model we will create after this model, and here we will put meeting user. So what it will do, it will give us that array list for all the meeting user which are in this particular meeting, and we will get all the array. Then after that we have to do JSON, and we have to do some transformations, transform function, and here we have doc as a variable name, you can put anything. Here we will put ret.id, that means whatever data we are returning here, and the ID we will replace it with our ret._id.toString. So what we are doing here, we have just replace our underscore ID with the new variable in the JSON, that is ID, and the value we are passing here the same, that underscore ID. Then we have to delete this variable ret._id, and we have to delete one more variable, that is ret._v. This will also come in the JSON, and after that we can put that timestamp also, timestamp true, and after that we have to do module.exports is equal to, and we have to export this module, that is meeting, So what we did here, we have just created one model file for the meeting. With the schema, we are including here host ID, host name, then we have the start time, then we have the meeting users here, and that will be the array of the reference of this meeting user module, and that model we will create now. And here we have to create new file, that is meeting-user.model.js file. And here we can just copy this model and we will paste here. We will just replace the things here, and here we will change it to meeting user. This one also we will change it to meeting user. Instead of host, we will put here socket ID. Type will be string, and we will make it as optional here. Then we have the meeting ID, and the type will be this one, that is Mongo schema dot object ID, and the reference will be our meeting model. Then we have our user ID. Type will be string, and we will make it as a mandatory here. Same we will copy here and we will paste here. And here we have one more, that is joined. Type will be boolean, and we will make it as a mandatory here. Then we have our name. Type will be string, and we will make it as a mandatory. Same we will copy this one also and we will paste here. We will change it to is alive, and this one is not required, and this toJSON is also not required. We will remove from here, and here we will change it to meeting user. So what we did here, we have created the model for our meeting user with that object containing socket ID, meeting ID, user ID. Then we have the joint variable, that is a boolean type. Then we have the name. Type will be string. Then we have is alive, and the type will be boolean. Then we have the timestamp, and here we are just exporting our meeting user. So if you are watching this video as a new user to the Node.js, I have already covered all this basic of the MongoDB with our Node.js REST API and everything. So if you have not watched the video, I will put the link in the description. You can just watch the video to understand what we are doing, because this video is a advanced topic of having the MongoDB with our WebRTC and all. So let's proceed further, and now we will create our service file. Here we have to create new folder, that is services, and here we have to create a new file here. Name will be meeting.service.js file. So first of all, we have to import our both the model file, that is constant meeting is equal to require, and we will put the path here ./model/meeting.model. Same we have to do for our meeting user also, is equal to require. Then we have ./models/meeting user model. So now we have to create some function here. The first one we are going to put here is the async function for the all, to getting all that meeting user and all, and we put here async function get all meeting users. And here we have to pass two parameters. First one is a meeting ID, then we have our callback, and here we have to use meeting user model dot find, and we have to pass here meeting ID, and we will pass here meet ID, this ID as a variable. And then we have response, and from here we will return callback, null, and response. In the callback we have that first parameter as a error message, then the second one as a data, and we are passing a response as a data over there. Then we have our catch function, and we will have error, and from here we will return callback error. So what we did here, we are just calling here meeting user, and we are calling here find function for getting all the meeting user on the basis of that meeting ID. Then we are just in the response callback, we are just passing the data what we are getting here. In the cache we are just throwing the error here. So now we have to create few more function, and the next one will be async function start meeting, and here we have to pass that params. Then we have the callback here, and here we have to create the object here meeting user model is equal to new of meeting user, and we have to pass this params here. It will create the object for our model. Then we have to just call here meeting user model dot save. Then we have the response here, and we have to put here async here response, and from here we have to do one more thing, and we have to, so whatever that meeting user is getting add to the meeting, we have to just update that meeting user to our meeting model also. Here if we go to our model file, here you can see we have our meeting user array, and we have to add a data here also. Whenever any new user add to the meeting, then we have to add that user in this meeting model also, so that we can have the updated array over there, and for that we have to just put here await meeting dot find one and update, and we have to pass here ID, and the ID will be params dot meeting ID. Then here we have to add the data here, and we'll put here $add to set, and here we will put meeting users, and we have to pass this meeting user model. So what does this add to set do? Basically it will add that value to the array, existing array. If that value is already over there, it will do nothing over there. Then from here we will just return callback null. Then we have our response here. Then we have the catch function, and here we have error. Then from here we will return callback error. So what we did here, we have just created one function, and the name of the function will be join meeting, not that start meeting, and start meeting function will be different. This will be join meeting. And here what we are doing, we are just created one model, that is meeting user model. There we are just creating that object with the meeting user model by passing the params. Then we are just calling here save function, and once we get the success, then we are just adding this array, this meeting user to our array of our meeting model also by calling this one, that is find one and update. And then we are just returning a callback for the success, and here we are just calling for the callback for our error. And before that we have to also create one more function, and name of the function is async start meeting. Here we put async function, and here we have params callback, and here also we have constant meeting schema is equal to new of meeting params. Then from here we will call meeting schema dot save. Then we have then operator response, and from here we will return callback null, and here we have response. Then from here we have catch function error. From here we will return callback error. So this will be used for by starting the meeting, and when we click on the start meeting, it will get the object in our meeting schema, and it will add the data over there. So now let's move further, and we will create few more function over there. And the next one is our async function is meeting present, and this function will be used for checking on the basis of that meeting ID if that meeting is valid or not by passing here meeting ID. Then we have the callback here. Here we have to call meeting dot find by ID, and we have to pass this meeting ID. Also we have to include our meeting user also over there, and we have to put here meeting users. Then we have to map it with our model meeting user. Then we have to call here then response, and we will check here if not of response. Then we have to call back here invalid meeting ID. In the else we will call here callback null true. Then we have the catch here, and we'll put here error. From here we will return callback error false. So what we are doing here, we are just checking here on the basis of the meeting ID if this meeting is valid or not. If it is valid, we are also just populating our meeting user array also with it, and when we get the data over there, with that data we are getting all that user also. And if that meeting is not found, we are just passing here invalid meeting ID, else we are just passing here data which we are getting from the database. In the catch we are just throwing the error here. So we have to create one more function in the similar, but there we have to just pass selected column, and we will change this name as a check meeting exists. And here we have to pick few column only, that is host ID, host name, and start time, and rest of the thing will be same. So our next function will be async function get meeting user, and here we have to pass params callback, and from the params we have to get meeting ID user ID is equal to params. Then from here we will call meeting user dot find, and we have to pass here meeting ID user ID. And on the basis of the response we are getting, we are just pick only first response, and we are just returning here callback null, and we will put here response index 0 because we are only getting one data on the basis of that meeting ID and the user ID. Then we have our catch here error. We will return here callback error. So we will now create one more function. That function will be used for storing our socket ID and all, and you can say like updating the user details. And we'll put here async function update meeting user, and we will put here params callback, and here we will call meeting user dot update 1 and we'll pass here user ID params.user ID. And we have to set here set params new true. Then here we have to check the response, return callback null, and here we have the response here catch. We have to put here error. From here we will return callback error. So what we did here, we are just updating our meeting user model by checking on the basis of that user ID, and we are calling a update 1. It will update only one record on the basis of that user ID, and we are just setting all the parameters what we are getting in that parameters data. So now we have our last method, that is async function get user by socket ID, and we will pass a params. Then we have the callback here, and here we have constant meeting ID socket ID is equal to params. Then here we have to call meeting user dot find. Here we have to pass meeting ID and socket ID, and we will put the limit here 1, that is it will only fetch one record only, because on the basis of that meeting ID and the socket ID we only need one record. Then we have the response here is equal to, and we will return here callback null response. Then we have the catch here, we have the error, and from here we will just return here callback error. So what we are doing here, we are just calling here meeting user, and we are just calling a find, and we are just limiting only one record. Then we are getting the response, and here we are getting the catch error. So now we have to export all our function which we have right here. Module.exports is equal to start meeting. Then we have our join meeting. Then we have our get all meeting users. Then we have our is meeting present. Then we have our check meeting exists. Then we have our get user by socket ID. Then we have our update meeting user. Then we have get meeting user. So all the function are not going to use in our API. We are going to use these function in our web socket and all for checking our service. So now let's move further with our controller file and all. So now we have to create our controller file, and for that we have to go to our folder structure, and here we have to create controller, and here we have to create a new file, that is meeting.controller.js file. Here we have to write constant meeting services is equal to required, and we have to import our meeting service file /services/meeting service. And from here we will write first API, that is exports dot start meeting is equal to required response next. Here we have to get that variables from our request body. Host ID, host name is equal to required dot body. Then here we will create one model where model is equal to host ID, and we will map it with our host ID. Then we have host name, we'll map it with our host name. Then we have our start time, and we will put here date time, date dot now. Then from here we will call meeting services dot start meeting. We will have model error. Then we have our results. From here we will check if error. Then we will return here next error, and here we have return response status 200, and we will send here message as success. Then we have data here, that will be results.id. So what we are doing here, we have created one function export.start meeting. Then here we are just getting the host ID and host name from our request body. Then here we are just creating one model with the host ID, host name and the start name. Then here we are just calling meeting services.start meeting, and here we are just passing the model. Then we are checking here for the error. If there will be any error, we will go to the next. Else we are just sending the state as a 200 with the message as a success, and data we are just passing here results.id, and this ID will be our meeting ID, and that will be passed in our application. So now we will create next function, and that will be used for validating our meeting ID and all. Here we have exports dot check meeting exist is equal to request response next constant, and we will pick the meeting ID from our request dot query, and this will be our query string. And here we will call meeting services dot check meeting exist, and we will pass here meeting ID. Here we have error or results, and we will check here. If error, we will return here next error, else we will return here response.status 200, and we will send here send request. With the message we will send here success. Then we have the data here, and we will pass here results. So what we are doing here, we are just checking here if that meeting is exist or not by picking the meeting ID from our query string. Then we are just calling here meeting services dot check meeting exists by passing our meeting ID. And here we are checking for the error, and here we are just checking for the status 200. We are returning a status 200. So here we have to create one more function, that is exports dot get all meeting users, and we have request response next. Then from here we have constant meeting ID is equal to request dot query. Then on the basis of that meeting ID, we will just call here meeting service dot get all meeting users, and we'll pass here meeting ID. Then we have error or results, and we have to check here if any error. Then from here we will call return next error, else we will return here response.status 200.send, and the message we will pass here success. Then we have our data, and we will pass here results. So our control file is also ready. So now let's move further, and we will create our routing file and all. And for that we have to just create here new folder, that is routes. Here we have to create a new file, that is app.routes.js file. And here we have to import our meeting controller, and we will write here constant meeting controller is equal to require, and we will import the file here /controllers meeting controller. Then here we have to write constant express is equal to require, and we have to import our express server here express. Then here we have constant router is equal to express dot router. Here we will write router dot post request / meeting, this will be the endpoint start, and from here we will write meeting controller dot start meeting. Then we will have a router dot get request / meeting / join, and here we will call meeting controller dot check meeting exists. Then we have router dot get request / meeting / get, and this will be used for getting all the user inside that meeting controller dot get all meeting users. And from here we will call module dot exports is equal to router. So our router file is also ready. So we have added start and join function. This one is optional. If we have just added for testing also that our API is working fine or not, for that purpose also we can use it. And here we are just doing the module.export. And so now let's move further, and we will modify our index.js file also. We have to create here index.js. Here we have to first import constant express is equal to require express. Then we have constant app is equal to express. Then we have constant mongoose is equal to require mongoose. Then we have constant mongo_db_config is equal to require ./config/app config. Then here we have to write constant http is equal to require http. Then from here we have to create the server. We have to put here server is equal to http dot create server, and we'll pass here app. And here later on we will create one file, that is meeting-server, and we will call here initialize meeting server, and there we have to pass this server variable, this one. Then here we have to write mongoose dot promise is equal to global promise. Then we have to do the connection and all, mongoose dot connect, and we have to pass here MongoDB config, and here we have to pass two variables, use new URL parser true, and the second one is use unified topology true. Then from here we will get the response. We will write here console.log database connected. Then here we have our error also. We will write here console.log database can't be connected. And from here we will put app.use and we will pass here express.json, and from here we will call our routing and all app.use. Route path will be /API and we will pass here require our route file ./route folder. Then we have app.routes. From here we will just call here server.listen process environment port number. If we not get any, we will just pass here default 4000. Here we have function. From here we will write console.log ready to go. So our index.js file is also ready. So now let's move further, and now we will just set up our meeting server, and that will be used for communicating the WebRTC with our Node.js and our Flutter application via our socket.io. So now we will create one enum file, and that enum file will contain all the command which we are going to send from our Flutter application and to be read from our Node.js application. So for that we have to first create here one folder, that is utils folder. Inside that we will create one file here, and the name of the file will be meeting-payload.enum.js file. And here we have to create constant meeting payload enum is equal to, and the first one will be join meeting, and a command which we are going to send from our Flutter application will be in this way, join-meeting. Then we have second one, joined meeting, and it will be join-meeting all in lowercase, but the enum name will be in that uppercase. Here we have user_join-user-join. Then we have connection_request. Here we have connection-request. Then we will have incoming_connection_request, incoming-connection-request. Then we have offer_SDP, that is session description protocol, and that terms which we have used in our introduction to WebRTC. And if you have not watched that video, you can watch the video to understand what those terminologies are. So here we have offer-SDP. Then we have answer_SDP, answer_SDP. Then we have leave_meeting. Here we have leave-meeting. Then we have end_meeting. Here we will put end-meeting. Then we have user_left. Here we will put user-left. Then we have meeting_ended. Here we will put meeting-ended. Then we have ICE candidate. Here we will put ICE candidate. Then we have video_toggle, video-toggle. Same we will do for the audio also. We will put here audio toggle, and here also we will put audio toggle. Then we have not_found, and here we will put not-found. Then we have last command, that is unknown. Here we will put unknown. And from here we will do module.exports is equal to meeting payload enum. So what we did here, we have just created one enum. So instead of putting these command name over there, we will just simply use our enum name like meeting payload enum dot join meeting and joined meeting. Then we have user joined connection request. Like this way we can do. So now let's move further. Now we will get one helper file, that is meeting helper file. Those will be having all the function of the command which we are going to use in our meeting server file and all. Here we will write meeting-helper.js file. Here we have to import two files, that is constant meeting services is equal to require /services/meeting service. Then we have constant meeting payload enum is equal to require /utils/meeting payload.enum. So here we have to create few functions, and the first one is going to have async function join meeting, and this will be used when we handle our join meeting enum, or you can say join meeting command which is coming from the Flutter to our Node.js. Then we will call this function. Here we have to pass meeting ID then we have socket, then we have payload, then we have meeting server. And these variable and parameter will be same for every function over there. And here we'll put constant user ID, name, and these data will come in our payload. So suppose if we are calling this join meeting command from our Flutter application to Node.js via WebSocket, there we are just sending the payload. Inside that payload, we are just sending here user ID and name. That will be calling in our join meeting. Then from here, we will call meeting services dot is meeting present. We will call this function by passing this meeting ID, and we will check here if that meeting present or not. Then we will have async error results, and here we will check if error and not of results. Then we will send message. We have to create one function here, and the function name will be function send message. Here we have socket as a parameter, then we have payload, and from here we will just call socket.send, and from here we will pass our payload with our JSON.signify, and we'll pass here payload. So from here we will just call this function send message, and we'll pass our socket here. Then from here we will just pass here type as a payload, meeting payload enums dot not found, and we are just sending the command to our Flutter application via socket, that is this meeting not found. Else if we get any results over there, then we have to create one function here, add user, and we will create that function here, and name of the function will be function add user, and we will have socket, then we have meeting ID, user ID, then we have name here. Here we will use our promise is equal to new of promise, because by calling this add user we have to do some other operation also, so we have to wait till the time we get the result, then only we can proceed further in that function. For that purpose we are using here promise. Here we have function resolve reject. From here we will call meeting services dot get meeting user, and from here we will pass meeting ID and user ID. Then we will have error here and results, and from here we will check if not of results. Then we will get here model, that means this user not exists. Then we will just create a model here for adding that user by putting here socket ID as socket.id, and this will be the socket ID of that particular user that we will save in our database. And then we will pass here meeting ID, and we will map it with our meeting ID parameter. Then we will have user ID, same with the user ID. Then we have joined true, name we will send here this one. Then we have is alive true. Then from here we will just call here meeting service dot join meeting, and then here we will pass the parameter this model. Then from here we will get error or results. So here we will check if we are having any results. Then we will put here resolve true, that means success. Else if we are getting here any error, we will put here reject, and we will pass here error message. Here we will put else condition. If that user found, then we have to just update our socket ID of that particular user, and here we will put meeting services dot update meeting user, and we will just pass here user ID, and we will map it with this user ID. Then we have socket ID, we will map it here with socket dot ID. Then here we are getting error results. Here we will check if results, then resolve true. Else if we are having error, then we will reject here with that error message, and from here we will just return promise. So what we did here, we have just created one function, that is add user, and here we are just passing socket, then we have meeting ID, user ID, name. Then here we are just doing that promise, and here we are just calling this get meeting user function by passing meeting ID or user ID, and then we are checking here if that user already exists in that particular meeting or not. If not exists, then we will add that user to that particular meeting by calling this function meeting services dot join meeting. Else we will just update the socket ID of that particular user by calling this update meeting user, and from here we will just return promise. And from here we will just call this function add user by passing here socket, then we have meeting ID, then we have user ID, then we have name. So instead of calling this whole code here, we have just split the function in that separate function so that we can have the clean code over here. Then we have then Here we have the result. Here we will check if result, that means that user edit or update is successful. Then from here we will just send message with that socket we will pass here, and the type will be meeting payload dot join meeting. So this notification will be goes to that user that meeting has been joined, and here we will just pass the data here, user ID. Here we have to put curly brackets. Then from here we have to notify other users also, that is someone joined that meeting except to that particular user which is joined the meeting. So here also we have to create one small function and name the function will be function broadcast users, and we have to pass here meeting ID. Then we have socket, then we have meeting server, and here we have the payloads, and from here we have to call socket.broadcast.emit, and we have to emit this message, and we have to pass json.signify, and we have to pass this payload. So what it will do, it will just broadcast to all the user except to the currently added user, and then all the other users get the notification like this particular user has been added to the meeting. Then we have to call this broadcast message from here, and we have to pass here meeting ID socket, then we have meeting server, the type will be meeting payload enums dot user join. So this notification will be goes that is user has been joined, and the data we are just passing here that user ID, then we have name, then we have all the other payload which is it's having, and here we have our error, and we will just console write here this error message. So what we did here, we have just created one function for join meeting. So this function will be called when user is going to join, and here we are just checking if that meeting present or not on the basis of that meeting ID, if that meeting is already present. If that meeting is not present, we will just throw the error here by sending that notification via the socket that is not found. Then here we are just checking if that meeting found, we will just add the user here. Inside that add user method, we are just checking for user if that user exists or not. If it's not exist, then we will add to the database, else we will just update the socket ID for that particular user. Then here on the success, we are just sending the message for that join meeting. Then we are just broadcasting that message to the other users, that is that user has been joined, and here we are just doing that error console and all. So next function which we have to create here is function forward connection request, and here also we have to just pass here meeting ID, then we have socket, then we have meeting server, then we have payload. Here we have constant user ID, other user ID, then we have name, then we have payload dot data. So these information is coming when we are just sending this broadcast message and all. Then we are just getting all this information over there, and just we are getting that payload data, and from here we are just creating one model is equal to by passing meeting ID, then we have user ID, and from here we are just passing this other user ID because we have to send a connection request to the other user, and for that we have to just get that socket ID for that particular user, and for getting that we have to just call here meeting services dot get meeting user, and here we have to pass this model. Then we have error results, then here we will check if results, then we will send a payload here, send payload is equal to json.signify, and we will just create here type, and that will be meeting payload enum dot connection request, and the data we are just passing a user ID, name dot payload dot data, and from here we will just call here meeting server dot to, and we will send this connection request to the other user on the basis of their socket ID which we are getting from here by calling a results dot socket ID dot emit message, and here we will just pass the message here, and we will send this payload data. So what we are doing here, we are just created one function forward connection request, and that will be used when any user want to connect to the other user or want to join to the meeting. Then here we are just created one model with that meeting ID and user ID, and on the basis of that we will just calling our get meeting user Mongo from the MongoDB, and there we are just getting the result, and that result will be used for our socket ID. Then here we are just creating one payload, that is send payload, and there we are just doing the json.stringify, and a type we are just passing here meeting payload enum.connection request, and data we are just passing a user ID, name, and a payload data. Then we are just sending this meeting server.to. That means that socket server is sending the request to this user on the basis of their socket ID, and we are just passing this message. We are just calling this send payload by passing that connection request and all. So next function will be the similar, and we have to just copy this one and we have to paste here, and we will change it to forward ICE candidate. Here also everything will be same, just we have to change that meeting payload enum and we will change it to ICE candidate, and rest everything will be same. And here instead of name we are getting here candidate. Then we have our next function that will also be similar, and we have to just copy this function and we have to just paste here, and name will be forward offer SDP. Here we are just getting user ID or the user ID and SDP as a payload, and here we will just change it to offer SDP. And here also instead of passing this name and payload, we have to just change it to candidate. In this function forward IC candidate, we have to just change the data as a user ID, and candidate we have to pass in the send payload. Similar in this function also, in the offer SDP we have to just pass a user ID and SDP. Now again we have to copy this function for the next function, and our next function will forward answer SDP, and here everything will be same, user ID or the user ID SDP, and here we have to just change the enum to answer SDP, and rest everything will be same. Again we have to copy this function and we have to paste here, and here we have to change the name as a user left, and here we are just getting here user ID, and we don't need to check anything over here for that meeting user and all, because this is the notification to send to everyone. And we have to just call here broadcast function, and we will call here broadcast user, and we have to pass here meeting ID, then we have socket meeting server, then type will be meeting payload enum dot user left, and the data we are just passing here user ID. So what it will do, this function will just broadcast to every user except to that particular user. For if any user left the meeting, then it will throw that notification for user left, that particular user left. Same we have to copy again and we have to paste here, and we will rename it as a end meeting. Here also everything will be same except this payload enum we have to change it to meeting. And after throwing that broadcast user message, we have to remove all that user from our socket also, and for that we have to just call here meeting services dot get all meeting users, and we have to pass here meeting ID. Then we have error results, and here we will put the loop for loop let I is equal to 0, I is less than results dot length I plus plus. Then here we will create one variable constant meeting user is equal to results, and we'll pass here I. Then we have to just call here meeting server dot sockets dot connected, and we have to pass here socket ID on the basis of this meeting user variable dot socket ID, and we will call here disconnect. So what it will do, we are just looping through our get all meeting user on the basis of that meeting ID, and we are getting that meeting user object, and we are just have to fetch our socket ID, and here we have to just check here if that user is connected on the basis of that socket ID, then we have to disconnect that user. So here we have to again copy this function and we have to paste here, and here we have to remove this code, and here we have to rename it to forward event, and this will be generic event, will be used for our video toggle, or you can say audio toggle. So here we have to just, instead of putting here meeting enum, we have to just pass here payload dot type, and here we have dot payload dot data. So we have created all the functions. So now we have to export those functions with module dot exports is equal to, first function will be join meeting, then we have forward connection request, then we have forward IC candidate, then we have forward offer SDP, then we have forward answer SDP, then we have user left, then we have end meeting, Then we have forward event. So our meeting helper file is ready. So now we will consume this file by creating a new file, that is meeting server file. So let's move further. So now we will create a new file, that is meetings-server.js file, and we will create it outside meeting-server.js file. And here first we have to import constant meeting helper is equal to required./utils/meeting helper. Then we have to import our enum file, meeting payload enum is equal to required./utils/meeting payload.enum. Here we have to create some private functions. Function parse message, and here we have to pass the message here, and we'll put here try catches so that if we are getting any invalid message and all, we are getting that error also. In that case, error handling will be done properly. Error. And here we have constant payload is equal to json.pass. So whatever the message is coming, we have to pass that message, and from here we will return payload, and from here we will return type meeting payload enum dot unknown. So next we have to create function listen message. There we have to pass meeting ID socket, then we have meeting server, and from here we will call socket dot on. So when we get this in the socket, this message, from here we will pass message, and we have to call the function which we will create here, handle message, and from here we will pass meeting ID socket and meeting server. So now here we have to create one function for handling that message, handle message, and here also we have to pass these information, meeting ID socket and that message and meeting server. Here we will create one variable, payload is equal to empty, and we will check here if the payload is coming as a data or as a JSON object, and here we will put type of message is equal to string. Then we have to just call here payload is equal to parse message, and we have to pass this message, else we will just call here payload is equal to message. That means we are getting that payload in that object only. Then from here we have to just put here switch case payload dot type, and here we will check case, and the first case will be meeting payload enum dot join meeting. Then we will call here meeting helper dot join meeting, and we have to pass here meeting ID socket payload and meeting server, and here we will just break it. So same we have to do for all the cases. And the second one will be connection request. Here we have to change it to forward connection request. Rest everything will be same. The next one will be our offer SDP. Here we will change it to forward offer SDP. Here we have answer SDP, and we will change it to forward answer SDP. This one we will change it to leave meeting. Here also we will change it to user left. Then we have end meeting, and this one we will change it to end meeting function from the meeting helper. And next one will be our video toggle. Same we have to do for the audio toggle also. Here we will just call forward event, and rest everything will be same. The last case will be our unknown. If it will be unknown, we will just break here, and default also we will break here. So what basically we are doing here, we are just handling the message on the basis of that message. So if we go to this function, you can notice here, if you go to our helper file also, you have noticed here we are just sending this broadcast message also, and on the basis of that payload we are just checking here what type of request it is coming. Is it a join meeting, connection request, offer SDP, answer SDP, leave meeting, end meeting, and according to that we are just calling the helper method. So instead of putting all those code here in this file, so just to keep the code clean and maintainable, we have just created one meeting helper file, and there we have added all the function in the detail, and here we are just doing the implementation and all. So here we have to create one more function, that will be the public function int meeting server, and here we have to pass server. Here we have constant meeting server is equal to require socket.io, and here we have to pass this server. Then here we have to just call here meeting server.onRequest connection, and this is our socket connection we are doing here. Socket, we will just get here meeting ID also from our socket.handshake.query.id. Then here in the listen message we have to just pass here meeting ID, socket and meeting server. So what we did here, we have just created one function initialize meeting server by passing this server, and this function we have to call from our index.js file. Here we have just created the object for the meeting server on the basis of that socket.io, and we are just passing a server. Then we are just doing the connection on for our socket server. Then here we in the query string of we are getting the meeting ID from our Flutter application. Then we are just calling here listen message, and we are just passing a meeting ID, socket and a meeting server here. And if we go to this function, you can see here we are just calling socket.on by calling here this message, and this message we have to pass here after this socket. And here we are just doing all the handling of the message, and on the basis of that payload type and all, we are just checking what type of payload is coming from the application request. And then we are just according to that calling the functions here. So now we have to just call here module.exports is equal to initialize meeting server. So now we have to just go to our index.js file, and from here we have to just import here constant initialize meeting server is equal to require, and we have to import here /meeting server. Then we have to call here initialize meeting server, and we have to pass this server here. So it will just call this socket and all from here, and we can remove this one. So we can't do the testing of this API. We have to just implement this one in our Flutter application. From there we will get the issues if any. Then we have to modify our NodeJS application. So in the next video we will cover our Flutter application by implementing this API over there. So I hope you like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share. I will come back soon with another awesome video. Thank you for watching the video.